All right, this is grade 7 from our series, and this one deals with stories from the New Testament, all about Jesus and stories that Jesus himself told. But we will begin with the story of John the Baptist. Now, like Jesus himself, John the Baptist was also a miracle baby. Think of all the miracle babies in the Old Testament. There was Isaac, there was Samson, there was Samuel, quite a few miracle babies in the Bible stories. But John is special as a miracle baby, not only because of the age of his parents, but the mission that he was given to prepare the way for the Messiah, to prepare the way for Jesus. And so his birth was special, unexpected, and took the special power of God. We don't know much about his childhood, because the next time we encounter John, it was as a preacher in the wilderness of Judea. And what we gather from this is he was a fiery preacher. He did not mince words. He did not spare people. He went out at them, and he made sure that they knew exactly what he thought about it. And so he attacked people at their sinful points. He called them names. He told them they were doing the wrong things. Even the rulers, like Herod, who eventually would be responsible for his death. Now, John lives long enough to see Jesus appear on the scene. He gets the opportunity to baptize Jesus and start the ministry of Jesus, including introducing 2 of his own disciples who became disciples of Jesus. But he was arrested for attacking Herod, who had an adulterous marriage with his brother's wife, and the woman harbored a grudge against him. And so eventually he was arrested, and the price for his attacks, for his what he did, how he spoke out, was not just imprisonment, but actually death. Herod has his big party, the daughter dances, and Herod says, "Okay, I'll give you anything you want." She asks her mother, "What shall we ask?" And the mother knew exactly what she wanted: the head of John the Baptist, served on a plate. Can you imagine what that would have been like? Gruesome, awesome, awful. And yet, he may have died tragically. But unlike a lot of people in life, he died having fulfilled his mission. And I think that is the only thing that God really expects from his people. We may not have the best life, but we can certainly fulfill our mission that God gives us. The next 2 lessons, we look at the birth of Jesus. Now, there are 2 different accounts of the birth of Jesus, one by the Gospel of Matthew, one by the Gospel of Luke. Let's look at Matthew first and highlight some of the important features. One of the features of Matthew's story is that the human father of Jesus, Joseph, was completely unprepared. He was unprepared for the miracle. He was unprepared to be a father. He was unprepared to carry the price that this might incur. And it required an intervention by God, sending an angel, and the angel telling Joseph, "It's okay. This is me. Don't worry about it. I will help you." And so Joseph accepts his mission, accepts his job, but kind of hesitantly, because he wasn't sure that he was cut out, that he was the person for it. The second feature of Matthew's story is the visit of a group of people known as the Magi. This is a Persian word, so probably they came from the Persia, Babylon region. Now, most people think that there were three magi, but actually the Bible text never tells us that there were three. It tells us they brought three gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh, but it says nothing about having three people. In fact, it was unlikely that there would have been only three because it was unsafe to travel in such small numbers. They would have had a lot of people with them, and they appeared to be rich, they appeared to be important, and such people would not travel in such a small entourage. They would have had a whole group of people traveling with them, a whole caravan, if you like. They came, and they understood exactly who this Jesus was, because they first went to the court of Herod and says, "We are looking for the king of the Jews." Herod gets really upset by that, and then they find Jesus in Bethlehem. The next part of Matthew's story is that the visit of the wise men incurs the anger of Herod, who decides to destroy all of the baby boys in Bethlehem to try and get rid of this new baby called King of the Jews, this Jesus. Now, since the wise men did not return, or these magi did not return to Herod to tell him where the baby was, he simply took that blanket option, committing this horrible crime against all the children in that town of Bethlehem. But Joseph and his family had been warned, and so they had escaped to Egypt and stayed in Egypt until Herod died before returning. But they didn't return to Bethlehem or Jerusalem, but rather straight to Nazareth, which was the home place of Joseph and Mary. And so the story of Jesus takes on three stages. This encounter of the father, Joseph, with the angel, the encounter of the Magi with Jesus and also with Herod, and then ultimately the escape to Egypt, and then the return to Nazareth. And that is how Matthew tells the story. Luke tells the story of Jesus' birth rather differently, or rather with rather different details. For example, it is not Joseph who is told about the birth, but rather Mary, the mother. And the mode of communication from heaven is the same, though. An angel came, spoke to her, and said that she was loved by God and she was honored above all women, and God had chosen her to be the mother of his child. Can you imagine this very young girl, pre-puberty, probably 13, 14 years of age, suddenly discovers she would have a child, and it is by God. It is not by some human. She's not even legally married yet. But somehow Mary understood that this was an angel. She understood that this really was a message from God. And so she accepts her mission. Made her life difficult. She had to run away from Nazareth for a while and find comfort in her cousin, who happens to be the mother of John the Baptist. The two babies would be 6 months apart. The second part of Luke's story is the appearance of the angels to a group of simple shepherds with song and dance, and telling the shepherds that good news has come, and the good news is for everybody, and they should go and find this baby, which they did, and worshipped him. So Matthew speaks about important people coming to visit the baby Jesus. Luke speaks about ordinary shepherds coming to visit the baby Jesus. One of the interesting things about the birth of Jesus, according to Luke, is that the praises of this king would come not just from the great and the mighty, not just from the wise men, but also from the mouth of babes, the mouth of children. And so that is how Luke tells that story. A little different account, but focusing more on the mother's side and the mother's experience and the upbringing of Jesus. Luke is the one that gives us a little insight into Jesus as a boy. There's one episode of this Jesus visiting the temple and having a great discussion with all these famous teachers and rabbis, and they are so surprised. How could this young child know so much? But you see, that is how the story is told, that this young child had come to save the world, and he is God. So in both accounts, he is God who's come into the world. One in a more Jewish way, in one a more universal way. The next major story in the life of Jesus is what is known as the temptations. We will follow Matthew's gospel for this. There's an account of it in Luke as well. But Matthew's gospel is the one that seems to give us the 3 stages of the temptation. Now, Jesus was baptized. He went off into the desert. He was there for 40 days and 40 nights. He did not eat or drink. He was fasting. And after the 40 days, Satan comes. And Satan is ready to tempt him. This was the weakest point in Jesus' life. Satan thought this is the way to attack him. But he did not attack him on the weakness. He attacked him on the strengths. This is important to understanding temptation. Okay, temptation number 1. 40 days, 40 nights, no food. Anybody would be hungry, right? And Jesus had the power to make food out of nothing. And so Satan knows this. So he comes to Jesus and probably takes a stone in his hand and he says, come on, you see this beautiful stone? You are the Son of God, right? If you are the Son of God, I'm sure you can make this stone into bread. Now, Jesus could have done that. You and I cannot do that. But Jesus refused to do that. He said that, no, humans need more than bread. They need more than food in order to survive. Okay, that didn't work out. So Satan takes Jesus to the top of the temple. Okay, we're not sure which part of the temple. Must be one of the high towers. And he says to Jesus, well, you are the Son of God, right? You are the commander of the angels in heaven. Why don't you jump down? And I'm sure when you jump down, God will send angels, lots and lots of angels, and they will come and catch you and you will not die. Jesus turns around and he says, no, you cannot test God. God has his own plans and his plan is for me to be here. Fail again. He tries one more time. He takes Jesus to the highest mountain, probably the Mount of Olives or maybe a different mountain altogether. And there it says that he opens the future to Jesus. He reveals, and we do not know how the devil has that power, but he reveals the future of the world and all of its glories. And he says, if you will bow down to me and worship me, I will give you all of this glory, like he had the authority to do that. This time Jesus did not quote scripture against him. He simply says, get lost. Get behind me. You are the Satan. You are the devil. Okay, you cannot worship anyone but God. And Matthew says that Satan left Jesus for a while. He was determined and he would come back at Jesus in different ways later. But for now, the temptations are over. Once Jesus began his ministry, he started to make friends who eventually would be known as his disciples. One of the earliest accounts about somebody being interested in Jesus was a learned rabbi by the name of Nicodemus, who came for a nighttime interview. He didn't want to be seen with Jesus in the daytime because most of his colleagues thought that Jesus was really not the right person to follow. But Nicodemus had questions. He somehow felt that Jesus could answer his questions. And so he came to Jesus at night and they had a good conversation. Jesus opens up to Nicodemus the fact that you need to be born again. You need to start life all over, spiritually, not physically, not being born the way you are. It's as if Jesus says that every human being needs 2 kinds of births, the physical one and then a spiritual one. The physical one brings him to life on earth. The spiritual birth brings him to life with God. And so that was an attempt on the part of Jesus to make some friends. He made friends with another strange guy called Zacchaeus, very short man, was a tax collector, rich, hated by everyone. He tried to see Jesus, but he was too short and the crowd didn't want him to come near Jesus. And so they kept him out. So guess what Nicodemus did? Zacchaeus did. This guy was driven. He wanted to see Jesus, so he climbs a tree and he sits there on the branch and hopes that Jesus will not notice. He just wants a glimpse of Jesus. Jesus stopped. Nicodemus, what are you doing up on that tree? Come on, come down. I'm coming to your house for dinner. Have you ever invited yourself to someone's house for dinner? Jesus did. And of all the people in the world, Zacchaeus, this hated man, this corrupt tax collector, and Zacchaeus was so astounded by that simple act of Jesus that not only did he give dinner, he changed his life completely, including repaying all the money he had cheated from people and donating a lot of money to charity. Jesus also had family friends. There's this little family in Bethany, a brother Lazarus, two sisters, Mary and Martha, and they became Jesus' closest family. In fact, they became so close that Jesus, whenever he traveled through the southern part of the country, their home became like his personal hotel. And later on, we would encounter the story where Lazarus falls very ill and he dies, and Jesus brings him back to life. So there were some interesting people who became friends and disciples of Jesus. There was the learned rabbi, Nicodemus. There was the corrupt tax collector, Zacchaeus. There was this little family in Bethany. And all three of them experienced great dramatic changes in their lives because of Jesus. Besides making friends, Jesus started to gather a group of people that would be his disciples, the ones he would train, and these people would become, guess what? They would be the managers of his mission once he had left. The first two that followed Jesus were two young men who were disciples of John the Baptist. One was John, one was Andrew. When they heard John the Baptist speak about Jesus as the Lamb of God, they immediately followed him. They knew this was the Messiah. We have to go with him. But they were kind of shy young men, so they followed Jesus from a distance. He had to stop and ask them, what do you want? And they didn't know what to say. They simply said, well, we want to see where you live. And so they spent a whole night with Jesus, and they were convinced. They became his disciples. But guess what they did? Both of them, particularly Andrew, went back home, found their brothers, John, his brother James, Andrew, his brother Peter, and brought them to Jesus. Clearly, they were close friends, but they were also close to their family. Their relationship with their brothers was so good that Andrew was able to convince his brother Peter, much older than him, to come. He says, come, we have found the Messiah. You've got to come and see, and you will know he's the Messiah. I am convinced. Listening to your younger brother and realizing that he might be speaking the truth, and then accepting it and following, that must have been difficult for Peter. And yet he trusted his younger brother. He says, okay, if you think that is so, then let me come. And he became a disciple of Jesus. James became a disciple of Jesus. Then Jesus met another young man called Philip. Come on, follow me, be my disciple. He did. And he was convinced too. But he had a really good friend by the name of Nathanael. And he says, I cannot do this alone. I shouldn't keep such wonderful knowledge to myself. I need to go and bring my friend Nathanael. So he rushes back to wherever Nathanael was. And he says, Nathanael, we have found the Messiah, the one spoken of by Moses and the prophets. And Nathanael was a good Bible student, but maybe not good enough. So he asked him, he said, where is this Messiah? He said, come and see. Where does he come from? He comes from Nazareth. And Nathanael said, what? Nothing comes from Nazareth. That little town, nobody knows about Nazareth. If Messiah comes, he should come from important places like Bethlehem, Jerusalem. But why Nazareth? Philip did not argue with his friend. He simply said, come on, you come and see. And if you come, if you see, if you meet Jesus, you will know. He went, he saw, he was convinced. And so Jesus had his first 6 disciples because of those brotherly and friend relationships. Are you a good brother, a good sibling? Are you a good friend? If you are and you know Jesus, then maybe the most important thing you can ever do is to share that knowledge about Jesus to your family and to your friends. Jesus' life reached a climax or ended on a cross. Now, I don't have a wooden cross with me. This is the only one I have at home. But it gives you an idea of the sort of instrument that became the instrument of his death. You see, the Romans specialized on crosses. And they crucified people that they considered a real threat to the government or really hardcore criminals on the cross. And Jesus was crucified there for a number of reasons. The Jewish leaders wanted to get rid of Jesus. The Romans became convinced that he was a threat to society by wanting to be a king, or at least that was the accusation made against him. And even though the Roman governor did not really believe Jesus was guilty, but politics was important to him. And so he had Jesus crucified on a cross. Now, the cross of Jesus was not fancy like this little glass cross that I have. It was made of 2 pieces of wood that were kind of roped together, and the person was nailed to that cross and then hung there until they died. Now, Jesus died very fast on that cross, only 6 hours. However, what he said on that cross is important. One was to forgive one of the other criminals who were crucified with him and promise him paradise. One was to appoint a caretaker for his mother Mary, and that was John, one of his first disciples. And then the last word that he would say on that cross was, "It is finished." There was that sense of mission that is complete, that is over, that is done with. And so this cross eventually became the symbol of Christianity. And studies have indicated it's the most powerful religious symbol that has ever been made. An instrument of death, showing us how much God is willing to give in order to save us. And so Jesus' death on the cross was not tragic because it opened the gateway. It was a portal to victory over sin for all human beings throughout history. And so the people who got to watch him that day, many of them who may have been calling for his death, probably were changed by it to realize, how could somebody do this if they didn't really love someone? You have to love somebody so much to go through an experience like the cross. And that's what Jesus did. Well, the story of Jesus actually did not end on the cross. That was sort of an anticlimax. Because the real ending of the story is Jesus died on a Friday, he was buried in the grave, and early on Sunday, an angel came from heaven, shattered the stone that was there over his tomb, and he rose back to life. Well, he had told his disciples he would come back to life. But of course, those disciples were always slow learners, okay? But he did come back to life. And when he came back to life, there were some people who saw him. The disciples did. The first person to see him was Mary Magdalene. She was one of the female disciples who had been with Jesus for 3.5 years, the whole time of his ministry. And she didn't recognize Jesus when she saw him. Here was a man standing next to the tomb, and he says, "So why are you crying?" And she says, "They have taken away my Lord. Can you please tell me where he is?" Mary, when she heard that, she turned around and realized this was Jesus. This is what Christians call the good news. The fact that Jesus died and came back to life. In fact, to the Bible, this idea of resurrection is the most important concept of salvation. Without resurrection, salvation is impossible. And Jesus guaranteed that. The last thing he did with his disciples after the resurrection was to perform maybe his final miracle. They had been toiling all night. Nothing was caught in the nets, no fish. Jesus comes by and he asks them to put their nets again into the fish, and they caught 153 fish. These are known today in Israel as St. Peter's fish. Here in Asia, we know them as tilapia. So they're fairly big fish, and that's a lot of fish. There may be a hidden meaning to the number, but it was the last thing that Jesus did, because when he first called them, he had said, "I will make you fishers of men." And now he showed them what fishing really meant. Not empty nets, but nets that are full. Now they would finally understand that they were to go out into the world and fill the nets with people to bring back into God's kingdom. And after that, a few other things happened, a few more days, and then Jesus left and returned to heaven. But he did not leave his work in failure. He left 12 men who were now determined, plus a number of women equally determined to grow the gospel, to grow the kingdom of Jesus. You might be one of them. Who knows?